Welcome, folks. So tonight's talk is about Drumbeg Parish Graveyard. So as it says there on the slide, a virtual tour of 20 headstones in Drumbeg. So Drumbeg is one of the 20 cemeteries that features in my forthcoming book. I'm holding up now, 2020. And I did a number of tours last summer stroke autumn in some of the cemeteries that graveyards feature in that book. And Drumbeg was one of the more popular ones amidst mediocre competition. So I thought I would do this talk tonight. So those are a couple of guys that feature in Drumbeg. The Celtic headstone on the left is Walter Henry Wilson. And then the guy on the right is Sir Ian Fraser. I think I might have given Walter a middle name there. He doesn't have it. It's Walter Wilson. So I picked 20 graves, as I say, and they're not necessarily the same as those featured in the 2020 book. I've left a few good ones out. So apologies to Richard Graham if he's tuned in, because amongst the families that I won't be featuring that are buried in Drumbeg are the McCanses, the Andersons, as in Anderson and Macaulay, and the Charlies. And I won't also be mentioning Bishop McNeice, Louis McNeice's dad, or Harris Rundle, the optician. So as I say, I'll rattle through 20 of them. And the first one is, so they're in chronological order. The first one dates back to 1641, and this is a big grave on the side of the church, and it commemorates, it's quite hard to see, but if you look at about in the middle there, Lolly Spence knows all about this one. It commemorates Captain William Stewart, son of Lord Garleys, was killed at Kilcullen Bridge. He and his escort cut into pieces by a party of Roman Catholics, spelt CKS, in 1641. Also commemorated in this headstone is Anna Wilson, daughter of the Laird of Crogline, wife to John Stewart of Ballydrain, who departed this life December 25th, 1662, aged 66, and John Stewart, who departed this life November 4th, 1691, in his 70th year. The first dwelling erected on the estate of Ballydrain was a fortified bawn or farmhouse, built in 1608 by William Stewart. The Stewart family lived in the Ballydrain estate for the next 2 centuries, during which time they were engaged in farming and linen. In 1920, the house was purchased by John Barber Morrison, and the Morrison family resided in the house until 1940. During the Second World War, the house, like its neighbour at Wilmond, which is where Lord Nitty Dixon lived, across the road, was occupied by various units of the armed forces, both American and British. Malone Golf Club purchased the estate in 1960, and after considerable alterations, Ballydrain remains as the clubhouse for Malone Golf Club. So that's the first one. It's awful, commemorating Captain William Stewart, cut into pieces by a party of Roman Catholics in 1641. The next one then is, and there's a ghost story about this one. So this is, which will please Tom McLean greatly. This is the final resting place of James Haddock. He died in 1657. James had a great friend called Francis Taverner. And when he died, James died in 1657. He left part of his land to his wife Armanel and the rest to his young son, and he was to get the estate, his piece of the will when he turned 21. The executor of the will was David Davis, who several years after James's death married James's widow Armanel. They had another son, and Davis managed to alter James's will so that the new son would be the beneficiary instead of James's original boy. Davis would have succeeded in this ploy if it hadn't been for an unusual phenomenon 5 years later, if you believe this stuff. James's old friend, Francis Taverner, was riding over Drumbeg Bridge, in other words, quite close to the cemetery, near the church, late one night when his horse reared up, and there before him stood Haddock's ghost. "Take Daniel Davis to court," moaned the ghost. "There is something strange happening to my will." This apparition appeared on several occasions until Francis did indeed take Davis to court. The case was heard in Carrickfergus under Bishop Jeremy Taylor. By now the country was all agog, and as news of this apparition had spread, and the courtroom was packed. The blinds were drawn, and in the gloom the proceedings began. Eventually came the moment all had anticipated. "Call James Haddock," shouted the usher. No reply. The crowd laughed nervously. "Call James Haddock." Again silence. The crowd held their breath. "Call James Haddock," went the cry again, and slowly a hand, draped in a shroud, arose from the witness box, and a disembodied voice boomed out, "Is this enough?" The crowd erupted. It was enough, and the case was proved, and Davis was found guilty. So that's the story. The ghost of Haddock, of James Haddock, still roams the graveyard, and this headstone, despite numerous efforts to straighten it apparently, is tilted, and again apparently to allow him to exit the grave and roam the graveyard. So when I was doing the tour of this cemetery at Halloween there, doing a recce for it, I spoke to a guy who visits where his wife's buried in the memorial garden, and he says that sometimes when he walks up past this grave, that his dog on occasions goes ballistic and barks and all in the direction of this grave. And he also, more worryingly, claimed to have seen a shadowy figure hovering in the graveyard. So if you're a believer in ghosts, you don't think I am, don't be going up there after dark, especially around Halloween. So that's the wee ghost story. The next one then is this headstone, mighty fine one, kind of against the back wall as well, and that commemorates Hugh Montgomery, Cornet, 13th Light Dragoons, killed in a memorable charge of the Light Cavalry at the Battle of Balaclava, 25th of October 1854, aged 24 years. And you'll see that's just near the top of the headstone. They also lived in Ballydrain. I mentioned earlier this church lived at Ballydrain, which is now where Malone Golf Club is. The Battle of Balaclava took place on the 25th of October 1854 during the Crimean War. In the incident referred to as the Thin Red Line, around 500 men of the 93rd Sutherland Highlanders, supported by a substantial force of Turkish infantrymen, fired at the Russian cavalry. The event was lionised in the British press and became an icon of the qualities of the British soldier in a war that was arguably poorly managed and increasingly popular. So also commemorated in that headstone, you'll see near the bottom of the headstone is John Ferguson. Their second son died 30th of April 1876 from injuries received by a fall from his horse, aged 44 years. Also commemorated at the bottom then, George, their sixth and youngest son. He was a captain in the Royal Artillery, died 13th of March 1878, aged 38 years. And then this headstone is part of 3 in the same plot. And then that's in the next plot. You'll see there Ellen Georgina Montgomery, 6th and youngest daughter of the late Thomas Montgomery of Ballydrain. Well, she died at Davos, Switzerland, the result of a skiing accident on the 16th of March 1933 in her 53rd year. That's the Montgomerys. The next one is this fine little headstone. And again, Lolly will know all about this one. This is the final resting place for William Gouldy. And it says just in the base of the headstone, in memory of William Gouldy, an Irish volunteer of 98, in other words, 1798, died 8th of April 1873, aged 104 years. William passed away 75 years after the rebellion of 1798, at which time, during the rebellion, the Irish Rebellion of 1798, he would have been aged 29. So William would almost certainly have been the last of the volunteers to die, and he's known as the last of the Croppy Boys. That's William Gouldy. Next one then is John Curry. It's quite hard to read the headstone, but it says John Curry of Glenavanagh, White Abbey, who died 9th of May 1899, aged 67 years. John was the owner of a long-established and successful hardware merchant located at premises on High Street in Belfast, close to its junction with Skipper Street. Curry purchased Glenavanagh, one of the finest mansion houses with gardens and parkland running along the banks of the 3 Mile Water, from William Valentine, chairman of the Northern Bank, in 1894. When the Currys died, the estate was sold to the Gaffigan family, also leading linen and silverware merchants in the city, in 1915. Also buried in this plot is John's wife Eliza, who died 8th of December 1916, aged 79 years, sadly having also been predeceased by 3 of her children, Mary Campbell Curry, Margaret Bennett Curry, and James Gardner Curry. So that's down roughly where the Merchant Hotel is, the extension to the Merchant Hotel on High Street now. And you can see there a merchant, sorry, he was a hardware merchant, next door was boot manufacturers, merchant tailors. The next one is this fine Celtic cross there. You can see the spire of the church in the background. And this photograph was taken by Mark Doherty. So if Mark's tuned in, thanks for the photograph, Mark. And it depicts, sorry, it commemorates the man depicted here, and one of the men depicted here to the right. So the bottom left is Gustav Wolff, bottom right is Edward Harland, and then the guy with the beard is William Perry. So these were the 4 original partners of Harland and Wolff, but the guy with the moustache is the guy who's buried there, and he is Walter Wilson. He was born in Belfast on 4th of November 1839. He adopted naval architecture and engineering as his profession, and was the first gentleman apprentice taken on by Robert Hickson in his shipyard in 1857. In completing his apprenticeship in 1861, Wilson was given a place in the drawing office, where all the best people worked. And in 1863, he was appointed to the position of chief draftsman. After retaining that post for 5 years, he was promoted to sub-manager in 1868, and 2 years later became general manager of the works until 1874, when he was taken into the partnership. Wilson always took a keen interest in the welfare of his workmen and women, and in local affairs. He was closely identified with the old Working Men's Institute and helped to found the new Technical Institute in Belfast. He lived in quite some comfort. He lived in Stranmillis House, now in Stranmillis College. The house is still there. It's now, I think, the Students' Union. And he also lived at Beaver Park. Sadly, that house is now away, but it used to be where the near the RSPB car park, and the car park for the RSPB is in Beaver Park. The Midland Railway Company appointed Walter Wilson to the Directorate of the Northern Counties Railway of Ireland when it took over the line, and Wilson died suddenly on a train between Port Stewart and Port Rush on 14th of May 1904, age 64, and he was retaining a cigarette in his mouth as his body was removed from the train at Portrush Station. Quite a rock and roll way to go. So that's Walter Wilson. The next one then is commemorates Isaac Ward, and you might just be able to see in about the middle, just above that line on the headstone, it commemorates Isaac Ward in brackets Belfastiensis, chronicler of his native city, born 18 September 1834, died 11th of October 1918. Isaac was an authority on the social, political, and topographical history of Belfast, skilled in research with a passionate love of accuracy, and a retentive memory for the minutest details. Does this ring a bell, Mr. Nigel Henderson? He could trace his ancestry back to Roger Ward, who came to Malone with a colony of settlers in the 17th century. Under the pen name of Belfastiensis, Ward contributed numerous articles to the Belfast newsletter, dealing with topical and historical subjects. As a student of astronomy, also making multiple original investigations. Ward was knocked down by a pony and trap in North Street in Belfast on the 2nd of October 1916, succumbing to his injuries in the Royal Victoria Hospital 10 days later. Belfast newsletter of 14th October 1916 stated that the board of the Linhall Library have heard with great regret of the death of Mr. Isaac Ward, who was an honorary member and a good friend of the library, in which he took an active interest. By his death, the community has lost a man of unique literary and antiquarian accomplishments and of high and amiable character. So that's Isaac Ward. Next one then is a lady who doesn't feature in the book, partially because I only discovered her recently with the help of one of Tom McLean's excellent videos. And this is Lady Kitely. She died 31st of October 1929, aged 65 years. She was born in 1864, the younger daughter of Henry Smith of Northampton. Gertrude married the barrister, politician, and author Samuel Robert Kitely of Lisburn in 1892, and the 2 sons and 2 daughters. The couple first lived at Fort House and then later Drum House, which I mentioned earlier, at Drumbeg. Gertrude was elected to the Lisburn Board of Guardians in 1896, only 2 years after the law was changed to allow women to serve on these boards. She served on this board until her death in 1929. Was chair from 1913 to 1920. She also sat on a number of subcommittees and was in charge of supervising the boarded out or fostered workhouse children. This work, when combined with raising her own children, was a difficult task and led to her offering to resign from the board in 1905, a suggestion that was rebuffed. It was through her work with fostering children that led her to also work with child emigration schemes. Kitely was among those responsible for the extension of legalisation to Ireland in 1911, which facilitated the fostering of children whose parents were found to be physically or morally unfit, rather than those children who were orphaned or deserted. Around this time, she was a prominent member of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, otherwise known as the NSPCC, so this is for you, Julie, and chaired the Maternity and Child Welfare Committee of Lisburn Urban District Council. She was a member of the Board of Governors of Lisburn and Hillsborough District Hospital, as well as the Vice Chairman of Lisburn Employment Committee. She became a lady after her husband received a knighthood in 1912. She became the first woman magistrate to be appointed in County Antrim in 1925, when she became a Justice of the Peace. She had always suffered from poor health, declining in her later years, but remained active in her chosen causes. She died aged 65 at her home in the Drum House nearby. on the 30th of October 1929, as I say, after a long illness. One of her eulogists described her as possessing a self-sacrificing sense of public duty, and her husband claimed that her days spent working in poor law were her happiest and most productive days. That's quite a phenomenal lady, Lady Kitely, and she could quite possibly feature in a forthcoming book of mine, featuring 50 fabulous females, due out in 2039, the way I'm going these days. So the next one is, you'll just be able to see at the bottom perhaps, it commemorates Bro Hellstrom and Oiva Mustonen, seaman of the bark Herzogen Sicily, died at Belfast, 12th June 1935. On the 12th of June 1935, the four-mast bark Herzogen Sicily was discharging her cargo of wheat from Port Lincoln, Australia, when the 2-ton boiler of her donkey engine exploded, ripped through the thick panels of her deck, soared over 100 feet into the air, and crashed through the roof of the quay shed, killing the 2 young Finnish sailors in the engine house instantly, and also injuring 2 other members of the crew. The Herzogen Sicily was the oldest of these famous clipper ships afloat. She'd been 110 days sailing into Falmouth and a further 7 days to Belfast. Bro Hellstrom was aged 22 and Oiva Mustonen was 21. And this small, square, rough-cut granite Celtic cross marks where they are buried. So Tom McLean has a video of this, so if you want to see him searching and finding this grave, if you go on to Tom's YouTube channel on Positive Belfast, Tom McLean. The next one then is this man. You'll see that at the headstone there it commemorates Sergeant Pilot Walter F. Rusk, RAF, interred at Peterborough, killed in active service 8th of October 1940, aged 29 years. He was born in Belfast in 1910 and became a prominent motorcycle racer. In 1929, at the age of 18, he started his first Northwest 200 race on a Sunbeam bike, breaking a lap record on a Veloset the following year. This is another one for you, Tom, the biker. Rusk finished second in the 1934 European 350cc Championship, also winning the Northwest 200 on a 350cc Norton Model 40, and racing in the German and Swiss Grand Prix of 1935 and the Isle of Man TT on a number of occasions. On the track, Rusk gained the nickname the Blonde Bombshell at the Ulster Grand Prix Clady circuit, recording the first 90 mile per hour and then 100 mile per hour laps in 1934 and 1939 respectively. Like many road racers with a love for speed, Rusk enlisted with the RAF during the Second World War, but sadly died in a training crash on the 8th of October 1940 when his Hawker Hart K4368 crashed into high ground at Hilton on the Hill in Leicestershire. And it says there in the headstone he was buried in Peterborough. Also commemorated on the grave is, I presume, a brother of Sergeant Rusk's, Sergeant Pilot Morris Patrick, I presume Rusk, RAF, killed in active service 27th of January 1942, aged 19 years. So there's a blonde bombshell there, bottom right, on his bike. And then that's him when he'd signed up for the RAF, bottom left. So my thanks to Nigel Henderson for this one. Not for the poor photograph, because his photograph is much better than this. This is my photograph, so thanks to Nigel for the information. These guys, this headstone and in this grave are 3 victims of what is known as the Belfast Blitz, aka the German air raids. Mary, or May Emily Mackey, was born on 17th of September 1895 at Kilgool in County Donegal, and married John Harron on 30th of April 1912 at Drumholm, Church of Ireland, also in County Donegal. Their daughter Ethel was born on 21st of March 1913 at Ballantrae, County Donegal, and married William Vincent Ballantyne on 27th of March 1934. William was born on the 8th of March 1908 at Dunmurry to George Vincent Ballantyne and Mary Ballantyne. All three, in other words, May, Ethel, and William, were killed during the German air raid on 16th of April 1941. May aged 45, Ethel aged 28, and William aged 33, and they died whilst living at 126 Whitewell Road at Greencastle. So as I say, people refer to the Belfast Blitz, but if you look at these people here, they were killed out at Greencastle, out kind of County Antrim side, and then they're buried over here on the at Drumbeg, so outside in other words, outside Belfast. So if you want to know more about the Belfast Blitz, Nigel is doing a talk on Thursday night through this channel, through History of Ulster channel, commemorating Blitz fatalities who are commemorated in Carnmoney Cemetery. So the next grave then is the most well-known one in the cemetery, arguably, and definitely one of the most contentious. This is, you can maybe just see at the bottom of that bird bath there, it commemorates Doris Curran. And then the other side of the bird bath, again at the base, is commemorated Patricia Curran. And then that headstone there commemorates both, or a lot of the Currans, including Major Sir Lancelot Ernest Curran. He was a High Court judge and parliamentarian. He was born on 8th of March 1899. He was elected as Ulster Unionist Member of Parliament for Carrick in the Stormont Parliament, serving from 1945 to 1949, and was Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance, Chief Whip, from July 1945. He was then Attorney General for Northern Ireland, the youngest in the history of that Parliament. The Curran family bought Glen House, White Abbey, next door to Glenavona, which I mentioned earlier. Lancelot and Doris Curran had 3 children, Michael, Patricia, and Desmond, the latter a barrister, and then a Roman Catholic convert and missionary in South Africa. On the 12th of November 1952, Patricia, in other words, their only daughter and middle child, aged 19, she was a student at Queen's University in Belfast, was found murdered on the driveway of Glen House. 20-year-old RAF technician from Scotland, Ian Hay Gordon, was convicted of her murder. His sentence was overturned in 2000, and he sadly died in 2012. Research from a couple of local historians particularly interested in this case, suggests that the frenzied murder was in fact carried out by Doris Curran, the mother, who subsequently spent time in a mental health facility before her death in 1972. After the murder, Judge Curran relocated to Wentworth in the Durhamore Park in South Belfast, and he presided over the trial of Robert McGladdery for the murder of 19-year-old Pearl Gamble in 1961. McGladdery protested his innocence, but was later found guilty and hanged at Crumlin Road Jail on the 20th of December 1961. He was the last hanging in Northern Ireland. Lancelot Curran remarried in 1976 and relocated once again, this time to Rock Cottage at Tulliard Road, Drumbo, outside Lisburn. He died in Essex on the 19th of October 1984, aged 84. So say that's a very, very controversial murder. And I've just realised that Patricia was the same age, i.e. 19, as Pearl Gamble was. He was allegedly murdered by Robert McLattery. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that particular murder, but maybe people want to comment about it at the end of the talk. Certainly Richard Graham would want to if he's tuned in. The next one then is this sketch to the right features in the Drumbo section of my 2020 book, and that is Maynard Sinclair. And you can see there he's commemorated on the headstone as John, I know Nigel, John Maynard Sinclair, PCDL MP, PC Privilege Councillor, DL Deputy Lieutenant and MP, obviously Member of Parliament, 1896 to 1953. So he was 57 when he died as a result of the Princess Victoria disaster on the 31st of January 1953. He was a Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the Northern Ireland government at the time, and he helped women and children up to the boat deck, an ultimately fruitless task as all women and children perished, as sadly did Major Sinclair. On hearing of his loss, it said that Sinclair's mother-in-law died, presumably of a heart attack, adding further trauma to the family. The Maynard Sinclair Pavilion at Stormont is a tangible reminder of the esteem Major Sinclair was held in, whilst the children's ward at the Ulster Hospital in Dundonald is named in his honour, as is the Major J.M. Sinclair Memorial Pipe Band. Also interred in the grave and commemorated on the unusual horizontal slab is Maynard Sinclair's wife, Marjorie Sinclair, OBE, 1887 to 1978. So for anybody that hasn't heard of the Princess Victoria disaster, it's something I'm particularly interested in. So I've identified lots and lots of graves around the place of victims of the disaster. 133 people died in the disaster, and sadly, as I mentioned earlier, no women and children survived. So the next one then is this one, Boyle, but you'll see about the middle, it commemorates Jackie Boyle. Died in Paris air disaster, 3rd of March 1974, aged 26 years. This is down on the more modern section of the cemetery. So sorry, he's called John Patrick Clinton Boyle. He was on board the Turkish Airlines flight 981, a scheduled flight from Istanbul Airport to London Heathrow, with an intermediate stop at Orly Airport in Paris. The crash occurred when an incorrectly secured cargo door at the rear of the plane burst open and broke off, causing an explosive decompression that severed critical cables necessary to control the aircraft, killing all 346 people on board. At the time, Flight 981, known as the Ermenonville air disaster, was the deadliest plane crash in aviation history and is still the largest single aircraft accident without survivors. So that's John Patrick McClinton Boyle. So this is the Remembrance Garden of Remembrance in the cemetery. So in this latter section, you'll be delighted to hear of the tour or the talk. Sorry, I'm going to be mentioning a few guys who are commemorated here. And this is the first one. So you'll see on the bottom of the plaque commemorates Sir Francis Edward Evans, 1887 to 1983. So he was born in Belfast on 4th of April 1887, educated at the Belfast Royal Academy before being commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Royal Irish Rifles in December 1916. After serving in the Great War, he entered the civil service in 1919, and the following year completed a course for new consular entrance at the London School of Economics. Between 1920 and 26, he was the British Vice Consul at New York City, and for another 3 years after that at Boston. In 1929, he was sent to Colon in Panama, remaining there until 1932, when he again returned to the United States. He subsequently spent 5 years as consul at Los Angeles, and after a period at the Foreign Office, he returned to New York as Consul General there, an appointment he held until 1950. In 1951, he became Under Secretary of State at the Foreign Office. The following year, he was appointed British Ambassador to Israel, having become Minister there the previous year. This was immediately followed in 1954 by his appointment as Ambassador to Argentina, a post he held for 3 years before retiring. Knighted as KCMG in 1946 and appointed OBE in 1957. He was also the recipient of honorary degrees from the Queen's University of Belfast, University of Ulster, and Ripon College in Wisconsin, and was a Deputy Lieutenant of Belfast. As you can see there from the plaque at where his ashes are interred, his wife, Mary, Lady Evans, whom he married in 1920. He was born in 1898 and died in 1976. And then Sir Francis, died on the 21st of August 1983. That's quite a nice image of the old Sir Francis. The next one then is also a Sir. It might be a Sir that some people remember. It's this man here, Brian Morton, and there's a picture of Brian Morton to the right. He was born in 1913, died in 1991. That's what Google says. I've just looked at his headstone. Born in 1912 and died in 1991. He was one of Northern Ireland's leading estate agents, founding Brian Morton and Co. The company had branches all over Northern Ireland, and Morton became a local business icon. From 1969 to 1973, he was the chairman of the Londonderry Development Commission, for which he received his knighthood. This is what it says here, really. It says Londonderry Development Commission. He went on to become chairman of Harland Wolff in 1975 in succession to Lord Rochdale, and held the position until 1980. During his time, he envisaged the closure of the shipyard, but the government bailed the company out on a number of occasions. As a leading estate agent in Northern Ireland, he lived on an exclusive property, Rowley Island, on Strangford Lough, which is between Cumber and White Rocks. Sadly, his only son, Michael, he died. He's the first burial in that plot, and he died at the age of 12 in 1960. Brian Morton and Co. Estate Agency had their headquarters in Arthur Street in Belfast, and people like Eric Kearns, Dennis Templeton, Kevin Milhenge, and I think Philip Johnson as well, all started out their careers at Brian Morton and Co. Halifax bought out Morton's in 1987 and changed the trading name to their corporate brand image. A brief attempt to bring back the name of Brian Morton and Co. was attempted by a former employee, Colin Barclay, in 2008, but it was short-lived, and the business is now known as Pinpoint. So 4 more to go. At the bottom of this, you'll see the Hugh Pritchard grave, Hugh Pritchard headstone, and to the right commemorates Horace L. Hugh Pritchard, rector of Drumbeg, 1953 to 1982, died 6th February 1994, aged 75 years. Hugh Pritchard was asked to stand in for another clergyman one Sunday morning at short notice. A number of the vestrymen then met together immediately after the service and unanimously endorsed the enthusiastic opinion of Archie Wills, who said, "Yon's our man." So their man was born in Portadown in 1917, and he was educated at Portadown College before he went to Trinity College in Dublin. He combined an excellent academic career whilst playing for the college's first 15 rugby team and representing Leinster at interprovincial level. After graduation, he joined the RAF and rose to the rank of squadron leader. He later went on to France with the British Liberation Army, and from there moved to Java and to Japan and served as senior chaplain. On completion of his RAF service, he was appointed by Bishop W.S. Kerr as head of the Southern Church Mission at Ballymacarrat. And he was instituted in Drumbeg, in other words, the church that borders onto the graveyard, on 17th of August 1953. He possessed great ability in the effective use of both radio and television, whether as a commentator on a rugby match from Ravenhill or presenting the epilogue on television. In 1947, he married Helen Bellamy in St Margaret's in Westminster. They had 3 sons, John, David and Andrew. Sadly, David was killed in a road accident in Germany where he'd been serving as a flying officer in the RAF. Known affectionately to the family as Tid, he is commemorated at the family grave, and you'll be able to see that. Well, you might, if you've gone to Specsavers, you might be able to see it. Bottom left there, Brian David U. Pritchard, flying officer RAF, killed in Germany, 25th of August 1974, aged 23 years. So a small memorial window in the church was dedicated to Tid's memory on 29th of June 1975. The next one is this man, Sir Ian Fraser, and I think it definitely wins the award for the cutest photograph. He's posing there as his canine friend, and there's his headstone there to the right. So it's not an especially good photograph of it, but it's quite a striking headstone. Fraser was born on the 9th of February 1901, and he studied medicine at Queen's, where he won numerous prizes before graduating in 1923. He then worked as consultant surgeon at the Royal in Belfast and the Belfast Royal Hospital for Sick Children. In 1932, he became the first commissioner of the St John's Ambulance Brigade in Northern Ireland, and in 1935, he became its first commander. He won the Distinguished Service Order, DSO, in 1943 for his bravery during the Battle of Salerno at Cape Passero, leaving the safety of the hospital, personally retrieved wounded from the beaches. He worked without sleep for 48 hours and even donated his own blood to save lives. During the D-Day landings, he set up a field hospital at Arromanches, rising to the rank of brigadier. During that time, he was responsible for the implementation of the widespread use of the newly discovered penicillin through military hospitals, saving countless lives in the process. Fraser served as president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland in 1850, from 1954 to 1956, and was president of the British Medical Association. In 1963, he received his first knighthood and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1979 as Knight Commander of the Order of St John. France created Fraser as Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur. Belgium made him the Order de la Couronne, and the Dutch made him the Order van Oranje Nassau. So quite highly decorated. So he was also a Sir and a DSO as well, as I mentioned. He's known as Northern Ireland's best known surgeon, and he died in Belfast on the 11th of May 1999, aged 98. And he's buried along with his wife, Eleanor Mitchell Fraser. So that's quite a guy, Sir Ian Fraser. So the penultimate one is this man. This at the top there, Ken Reid, OBE, 1931 to 2001. He was born at Creggan in Derry on the 23rd of February 1931. He was the son of an RUC officer. He went to Trinity College, Dublin, He graduated with a degree in history and political science in 1953. After a spell teaching at Wesley College in Dublin, he returned to a post at his old school, Methody. Subsequent career moves took him to Lurgan College as head of history, the Donald Girls High School as headmaster, and then Grosvenor High School in the same position in 1973, where he remained for 21 years until his retirement in 1994. When his rugby playing days were over, he turned to coaching and the administrative side of the game, serving as president and then secretary of the Ulster branch of the Irish Rugby Football Union. Reid was then Irish manager, not coach, and so he was the manager of the team and guided Ireland through a series of international tours and the Rugby World Cup in 1991. He also served as IRFU president in 1994 to 95. The crowning achievement of Reid's life in rugby came in 1989 when, against all the odds, Ulster won the European Cup. He was awarded an OBE in January 2000 and he died not long afterwards on the 30th of April 2001, age 70. That's Ken Reid, a bit of a legend in these parts being East Belfast because of his long time at Grosvenor. You can see there also his wife, she was born in 1936, died 2017. So your suffering is nearly at an end. This is the last slide here, and this is one of them. This is in the Memorial Garden in Drumbeg Parish Graveyard, but I'm going to talk about another member of the Brand family first. Paddy Brand. I don't have a copy of his head, an image of his headstone, but he is actually buried, whereas the remainder of the family appear to be all in their ashes in the Memorial Garden. On Paddy Brand's, Paddy Brand was born on the 6th of February 1929, and along with his brother Peter, Paddy was the driving force behind the development of Brand's Arcade, Birdcage Walk, and Brands and Normans as the leading fashion houses of Belfast in the 60s and early 70s. Paddy was one of the best known personalities in Belfast, presiding over the closure of Brands and Norman both in Castle Lane and Fountain Street. When Paddy died on 10th of December 2005, he left behind a great wealth accumulation through property for his family who live at Upper Malone in a former Duffin family house. So you'll see there also Peter Brand. His ashes are interred in the Gardner Remembers OBE. Born 1931, died 10th of April 2013. And also commemorated there is Moore Brand, and other brands commemorated in the Gardner Remembers include Michael Leslie Brand, 1944 to 1986, Justin Michael Sheldon Brand, 1967 to 2000. So there's quite a number of brands in that Memorial Garden in Drumbeg. Paddy and Peter's parents are buried in Dundonald Cemetery and featured in the book about the cemetery. So that's that. Speaking of books, that's the my 2020 book. As it says at the bottom, there are 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries. The final draft is with is a way for changing. So I have this copy here, but it's not a final draft yet. So hopefully it'll be out before 2021 ends. Thanks very much, folks. Your suffering is now ended.